April 12, 2002, 7:05 a.m. Rose emerged from the restroom into a short hallway lined with framed photos, images of Mother Russia and the bygone Soviet era. Comforting. The entrance to the bar was a few paces away, and through that doorless opening she could see the mahogany bar with its brass footrest, the shelves behind it laden with liquor bottles, but no people. The other end of the hallway had the entrance to the ladies' room and a half-closed door that she knew led into the storage room at the back of the building. That was supposed to have been her exit. She grimaced and edged forward. She heard the chilling sound of guns being cocked. It was mostly open space, filled with tables and chairs with a row of booths lining the wall on the left, while the actual bar occupied the full length of the right. The front of the place was comprised of 2 large windows and a double door with shiny brass fixtures. She could see the street beyond the windows, mostly devoid of traffic thick with parked vehicles. There was a trail of blood across the hardwood floor leading into a crowd of men gathered around someone else laying on his back. They all looked up at her at the same time with surprised expressions. "Shit," Rose said. She began shooting as she walked toward them, not giving them time to respond. There were too many of them, far too many, and not all of them were Russians. Curses in Italian hurled her way mixed with the thunder of gunfire. Men fell like wheat, reflexively firing their guns into the floor or the ceiling as they died. They fell over each other scrambling for cover. Bullets began to cut the air as they zipped by Rose's head. She broke into a zigzagging run, darting from table to table until she reached the row of booths and ducked into one. The men were shouting in confusion and fear, reacting like a disorganized mob. She rose above the seat back and picked off a few more. She should have been afraid, but she wasn't. Belladonna never was. There were 3 times as many men here as there should have been. She ducked down to reload. The wall above the booth exploded in splinters as the men returned fire during the lull in her attack. Rose leaned out sideways and shot 2 more men, the last 2 who had not sought cover. Heads popped up and down from behind the bar, booths, and a few overturned tables. She counted 7 survivors and twice that many corpses on the floor. "You are so dead," one of the men taunted her, his voice nearly free of accent. "You got balls, I give you that, but you gotta be the dumbest man alive to try hittin' us without backup." "It's a chick, Yorgi," another man hissed. "You guys behind the bar, work your way down and we'll pin her in." "A woman," the first man said in disbelief. "No way." Rose studied the bar. Thick dark wood, a relic too thick to shoot through with any hope of accuracy. The booth, she realized, wasn't the best place to be in this fight, but it was too late to retreat now. She made and tossed aside plans as she listened to the men arguing. "We got to rush her," the authoritative voice said. Rose squeezed a shot toward it, making the men duck again. Sergei, alive or dead, had been dragged into one of the booths near the door. That was where she had to go. "It's your idea, Miss Ka. You do it." "I'm the one in charge now," the one called Miss Ka retorted. "She killed Vladimir already, and the Italians have no authority here." Rose pushed a fresh clip into her gun and paused. "Italians?" She groaned to herself. Today of all days, the Russians were meeting with real mobsters, one of the homegrown crime families. This could end up being more trouble than she'd signed on for. "Give it up, honey," Miss Ka yelled out. "Once we get behind you, you got no way out." "Hey, why don't we get out of here ourselves?" another man suggested. "Shut up," Yorgi snarled. "You're such a coward, just what I'd expect from a Georgian." "Fuck you, you oily pizda," Miss Ka shouted back. "Yob ti voyu mat. Kushite govno I umiite." "Enough," someone else shouted. "Are we fighting each other or this suka who has come here to kill us?" Rose heard the scuffle of feet behind the bar as men obediently moved down to flank her. She flicked both pistols to full auto and opened up on the heavily laden shelves. The guns kicked wildly, spitting blooms of flame as bullets shredded everything they reached. A hail of broken glass and liquor rained down on the men below. Quickly, Rose ejected the spent clips and slammed in fresh ones as the mobsters, soaked and glittering with glass, staggered to their feet and aimed their weapons at Rose. 3 men, only one got a chance to pull his trigger, but all went down with lead in their hearts. There was a flurry of cursing from near the doorway in both Russian and Italian. Rose swung over the edge of the booth and looked below. With no obstructions beneath, Rose was able to see all the way to the end. 2 pairs of legs dangled in sight. Rose put bullets into them, eliciting cries of pain. Swinging out into the open, she caught the men as they fell forward, killing them. More followed, taking the chance to shoot back at her, and she killed 2 of those before being forced back into hiding. An eerie silence fell over the bar. She could hear the panting of her opponents, the drip of liquid from the destroyed shelves, the pounding of her own heart, the shuffle of feet. She held her breath, listening carefully. 2, no 3 men left. The rasping was Sergei dying, but not dead yet. "Fuck it," she muttered and stood. She made it 5 paces toward the door before someone thought to try stopping her. A wide-shouldered man rose up from where he had been kneeling inside one of the booths. His hand shook as he aimed at Rose and fired. She let him, knowing he would miss. The bullet whistled as it raced by her ear. The man's gun clicked, empty. Rose shot him in his forehead. It was the look in his eyes, cruelty and hatred, that had compelled her to kill him. That was not the sort of man she could safely leave behind her. 2 others crouched over Sergei in the last booth. They looked up as Rose loomed over them. One had fear in his eyes, a terror that almost overwhelmed him. The other looked at Rose with hot eyes, smoldering with his anger. A righteous anger that made his face flush red and made his knuckles white where he gripped the handle of his gun. Neither of them moved anything more than their eyes, flicking their gazes from the barrels of Rose's guns to her ice-cold eyes. "Do you want to live?" she asked calmly. Sergei, she could see, was as good as dead. 1 bullet had passed completely through his chest. Red foam covered his lips, signaling a punctured lung. He stared at his killer with faraway eyes fading. The angry man moved, trying to jerk his gun up to bear on Rose, thinking she was distracted by her inspection of the dying Sergei. Rose moved the barrel of her weapon a fraction of an inch and put a shot into the man's throat before his brain could send the impulse to his fingers to pull his trigger. He slumped, gurgling a moment, then laying still. "Bad choice," Rose said softly. She turned her attention to the last man. "You." He swallowed loudly. "I wish to live," he said weakly. He looked down the length of his arm to the weapon he still held and seemed surprised to see it in his hand. Slowly, he loosened his grip and let the weapon fall to the floor. Then he began to weep and covered his face with shaking hands, curling into a ball. "Please don't kill me," he begged. "Please." Rose felt a swell of emotion. Pity for the man's fear, disgust for his cowardice. She pushed both feelings aside roughly. Sergei's eyes tracked her as she leaned over him. "Why?" he asked, voice failing. "Why me? I'm nobody." "You're somebody to someone," she said, "or else they wouldn't have sent me." "Belladonna," Sergei whispered. The corners of his mouth curled up in the barest hint of a smile. The fool was actually honored. "Who sent you?" His breath became gasps, ending in a long rattle. "I can't tell you that," she said. "Do you want me to finish it?" Sergei's body spasmed as he tried to cough, to clear his lungs of the blood filling them. He began to choke, sputtering, eyes wide. Jerkily, he nodded. Rose shoved one gun into her waistband and put her hand over Sergei's eyes gently. "Sleep," she whispered. The gunshot was almost muted, as if it too felt the grim solemnity of the moment. Rose stood stiffly, trying to put her emotions back into the shadows of her mind. The cowering man had never looked up. Rose put her other gun away and turned away. It was over, all of it. No matter what, she would never kill on someone's orders again. This was the end of that life, and it felt better than she'd expected. She knew of killers who always left a token at the scene of a hit. A glove, a coin, some mark on the wall. Signatures, they called them. Rose never did that. Belladonna was too good for that. Those who needed to know would know who had done this. The chance of retribution was always there. But they would want to kill Belladonna, and after today she was no more. They would never think to come for Rose. That was the way it should be. To hell with notoriety. The crack of glass made her whirl, which was good since it made the dart fired at her miss. She felt it glance off her shoulder, but the fabric held and left her unharmed. A hole had appeared in the front window and spiderwebs of cracks radiated from it. Outside, a group of men were approaching the door, moving quickly. One of them raised a strange-looking rifle to his shoulders. White of condensation puffed from the barrel just before another dart smashed through the window. Rose was already dodging. The guns were in her hands, blazing, making the men scatter for cover. They wore uniforms of some kind, khaki pants in a military cut with matching shirts and tan trench coats reaching down to the tops of mud-colored boots. And sunglasses. It would have made Rose laugh if they weren't so obviously intent on killing her. No, not killing her. Capturing. She sprinted for the rear of the bar, not waiting for another dart to come her way. As she dashed toward the storage room door, she heard the sound of splintering wood and glass from behind her. The men were hot on her trail. She yanked a flash grenade from its place on her belt, dropped it without breaking stride, and raced for the rear of the building. The Russians had a roulette wheel set up between metal shelves thick with electronics. VCRs, televisions, radios, DVD players, everything a growing black market needed. The back door was locked with a double-key deadbolt. Easy enough to pick if she had the time, and she didn't. The grenade went off behind her as she shot at the door. The deadbolt was tough. The hinges weren't. Wood splintered beneath Rose's weight as she flung herself against the door. Someone was shooting at her from behind, from the cloud of smoke the grenade had created. Rose tumbled into a trash-strewn alley and rolled to her feet nimbly. She'd planned her escape route a little differently, but there were still things she could use. Running flat out, she covered the length of the alley in a moment, rounding the corner as khaki soldiers spilled out of the bar in pursuit. They were lost to sight for a few precious seconds. She ducked down the side alley toward the street. The passage was almost too narrow. Perfect. She leaped onto a pile of wood and up to the ledge overhead. Bracing her feet, one against either building, she rocked her way upward until she could grab onto the broken metal rim of a fire escape. Bullets ricocheted around her as she threw herself through the open window. Safety here was an illusion. The men were professionals. Even if they couldn't come up the way she had, they'd still come. She kicked aside piles of debris to retrieve the satchel she'd planted here the night before. First things first. She yanked a remote activator from its pouch and flicked it on. It was back in the bag even as the sound of a distant explosion reached her ears, obliterating her presence in the bar completely. Leaving the room, she kicked over a can and stepped on the glass vial beneath. Noxious fumes billowed up from the floor. She closed the door firmly behind her. Anyone who followed her through that window were in for a long nap. She raced down the hall and up a stairwell. Footsteps pounded on the steps below as the men followed her. They'd hear her running and trace her easily, but that was exactly what she wanted. Better to know where an enemy was than to guess. She burst through the door at the top onto the roof. The sun was bright as it rose above the edge of the far roofs, an elevated horizon that made the day seem earlier than it was. Smoke curled into the sky from the bar, and sirens were approaching. That was fast, she thought. She stooped beside the door and pulled a thin tripwire from the box mounted against the outside frame. It stretched across the opening and secured to the opposite side. She flipped a switch on the box, then backed away carefully. The street was 50 feet below, too far to jump down. The next roof was closer, just a short 10-foot jump across the alley. She cleared the distance easily and made it to the next access door before the mine went off. The explosion was impressive, ripping a crater into the roof of the building behind her. Rose laughed as she ran down the stairs. Let the bastards chase me now, she thought. There's plenty more where that came from. There were dozens of stashes all over the city, weapons caches, safe houses, equipment, even cars. That was the legacy Sean left for her. Thinking of him put a pang in her heart as it always did, but heavier still lay the thought that this was supposed to have been easy. Her last job. A cakewalk, she'd called it. Now she was making a mental list of all her resources. She was planning a war. Well, it never hurts to be prepared, she told herself. But behind her thoughts lay something darker, something Belladonna wasn't used to: fear. Something told her it was going to be a long day.